Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. October is Adolescent Literacy Month on the Literacy View, and we have a very special guest with us today. We have Tricia Millar, and she is in England. She's originally from Vancouver, and she's been living in England for 30 years, and she has done some amazing work. We've been in contact on Twitter numerous times, and her work is phenomenal in the area of adolescent literacy. Tricia has books out, that reading thing, that spelling thing, programs. She does work with schools and consultations. She is someone who followed Diane McGinnis, and so did I. And we are both believers in linguistic phonics. And, we learned so much from Professor McGinnis. Tricia got into this because she started to work with teenagers, and she found that there was a big gap in what they knew in terms of being able to sound out words, and many of those children had behavior problems. She worked with boys. Let me see, I have that in front of me. She led a secondary school for boys with emotional and behavioral difficulties. And her work has helped many people along the way. So we welcome Tricia with us. And if you want to get in touch with her, you can find her on thatreadingthing.com. We will put that email address in the notes. So Tricia, I'm going to start off with our article today, which is Many Kids Can't Read, Even in High School. Is the solution teaching reading in every class? And that was in the Hechinger report from August 14th. And my question to you is a high school teacher responsible to teach reading? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a wonderful article, for one thing. Can I just correct something? I've never led a school. I just don't want to give that impression. I was a youth. We were doing youth work.
Oh, okay.
And it was through youth work that I got through one of the young people who had anger management difficulties, who got me connected with that school, and that's where the program was named, because no matter what I called it, a boy would say, "Hey, Trish, are we doing that reading thing today?" So that's where that comes from. I just want to give that little background.
We're doing that reading thing today. That's so cool. And that became the name of it. I love it. I love it.
It worked. And so we start because, and I want to say that little bit about youth work, because I actually wrote that reading thing for youth workers to deliver. A lot of the boys, they were all boys then, that's changed, but a lot of the boys we were working with were really not happy at school, and they wanted something that didn't feel like school. So coming out of youth work, I knew we could equip youth workers. And so one of my specialties, and this chimes with the article when we're asking science teachers, for instance, to teach literacy. One of my real focuses in life is creating tools for non-experts to use that are as effective, that can deliver anything that's effective as the experts. And I get in trouble a bit to say that when I say that, because people spend a lot of time and money becoming experts. But actually, if you've got the attention of the young person, that's half the battle. And so everything we do is very relational. Anyway, those youth workers did such a phenomenal job that schools began to say, what are you doing? What's changed? That one's coming back. That one, I hate to say it, that's the language. We'd written that one off. That's the kind of language we were hearing. He's coming to school now on time, right? And the idea really was that they belonged. So it started in youth work, moved into schools, and that's where we are largely today, and in prisons. So is it the responsibility of every teacher to teach reading? I think when it comes to teaching reading and actually using that language, I would say no. Actually, it's not that I disagree with the article. They describe my utopian high school, actually. But not being able to read is taboo, right? It comes with shame. It comes with behavior that follows that shame, because it's better to be angry and get in trouble than to be exposed as not able to do something. So what I feel about it is that teachers can be responsible. Any teacher can improve literacy through spelling, because spelling isn't taboo. You can meet a stranger in a coffee shop and make a throwaway comment about being a terrible speller, and you will not be judged. You would not say you struggle to read, right? We just know that. So when we go in that way, and I think that's largely what they're talking about in this article anyway, no one's getting a reading lesson in science. What they're doing is having a vocabulary lesson and pulling apart words. And you know, from the whole speech to print, we start with saying the word, which is a huge part of being able to use the word in writing and in talking, and then we take it all apart and put it back together. So yes, that's actually one of the loves of my life, is getting that science teacher who doesn't think it's their job, and I don't blame them, they're busy people, and equip them to make that huge difference. We've feedback from a science department in school that did use it was that when they did their mock exams, it's quite a different system over here. They write exams at 16 and they always do a practice session. They had almost no spelling errors across the science exam.
So from what I'm hearing you say, you think that the way to begin improving reading at the high school level is to train teachers through a spelling approach. I just want to be clear.
I think that's half of it. The first half is for those students who are really educationally vulnerable, and it does say it very briefly in this article, that those students who are in danger of falling right out of the system because they're, if they've got a second grade reading level and they're in 10th grade, they, for the same reasons I mentioned earlier, they need that one-to-one support. They need it to be very, very quick. They need to catch up. And then when they go back into the classroom, they need to know that what they've been learning out there is exactly what all their peers are learning too. So for me, part of this package is that everyone's using the same language about language. And whether it's your science teacher or your English teacher, English teaching shouldn't be 100% the responsibility of the English department.
So Judy, it's interesting what Tricia is saying, because you and I have decided to take on some professional development together in SRSD and Literacy IO. And we were talking about how there are certain strategies that can go across all the content areas. So whether it's middle school, high school, that there are certain things that teachers, if they knew, could be making it a part of their day. And Tricia is saying pretty much the same thing, but coming at it from perhaps a different angle. What are some of your thoughts about teachers in middle school and high school having, across the building, certain ELA strategies that are repeated in different areas throughout the school?
Well, in general, I think that, in literacy, we've neglected in the early years, social studies and science and so forth. So I'm really happy that, a lot of schools are making sure that they're giving equal amounts of attention to those subject areas. Because I think for a while, schools were so concerned that kids can't read and thought the solution was to get rid of that and do more of just teaching reading in isolation rather than incorporating all those items together. And I think that incorporation is so important. And, you know, doing it through the content areas and teaching kids these strategies throughout their day is brilliant, because the brain wants to see something multiple times, and the brain also needs practice in order to get good at something. Like, even as Faith just mentioned, I'm in training now for Literacy IO, and it actually has tasks where I'm actually engaging in comparisons, main idea strategies, and so forth, and I'm doing it. And then I'm like, oh, and I'm doing it again with another passage. Why? The brain needs practice. I need practice as an adult. And I'm sure that, middle schoolers and high school students would definitely benefit from seeing this throughout their math block and science block and social studies block, because it's not really just about learning these strategies. It's about becoming a successful human and being able to take these strategies and apply them into meaningful things. But I think the frustration that I think many high school and middle school and just teachers in general might have is, a lot of these tasks require kids to be able to read. Now, some kids are still struggling with cracking the code, and now the teacher is not being burdened, but the principal is going to want them to have access to all those kids. And how does that teacher make that happen, especially when maybe they don't have the training in how to teach kids how to read? And at the end of the day, everybody wants to help kids learn how to read, but everybody's training is different. And there are going to be kids in that classroom that have trouble accessing the material. So how can we make that happen for our older students as well?
So, Tricia, I want to piggyback on what Judy said. So, I think what we're saying here is that there's training for strategies for, let's say, comprehension and language. And then there's this word level work, the decoding aspect, where kids are still struggling at the high school level, being able to read, even single syllable words, but certainly multi-syllable words. What would you recommend for the high school to have, if they had to have like a core group of strategies for decoding, spelling? What would be the most important types of things that you would want to get across to high school teachers if you were charged with training them?
Oh, I love that. The most important thing is to start from the beginning, simple to complex. And that's for everybody at any age, simple to complex. It just looks a bit different with secondary students because they come with a vast range of latent knowledge. So we're not treating them like they're 5 because they actually know an awful lot. They don't know they know it, and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to use it, what they know. So I would say you start, in that reading thing, they're doing multisyllabic words in the first 30 minutes. On first meeting their tutor, because that's what they need. That's where you start. So within a couple of hours, they're spelling and building and spelling words like establishment. Okay, so just taking Hayek's, here's our philosophy, our ethos. It's totally safe. You're allowed to make mistakes. You must make mistakes so you don't learn. And so in that reading thing, we have the deal, and the deal is you don't have to know anything we haven't done together. Okay. The flip side of the deal is do you know what? I do want you to remember what we have done together. And for a lot of teenagers who struggle with literacy, people have stopped expecting anything of them. So that's massive at school, that they're expected. So do away with the spelling tests, but make language the air you breathe at school. And if every teacher is using the same language, so when it comes to spelling, it's okay. How somebody says, how do you spell, I don't know, throw a word out. How do you spell definite? Right? How do you spell definite? Well, let's just say it. How many syllables? Definite. Okay. Can you write de? Can you write fin? And then it might be the problem. They might forget the E on the end. Now that's pure speech to print phonics. How I would also do it is, you know what? You've got the word finite in there. If you can't see finite, you haven't spelled definite. And that's when you want the English department to then do the morphology around that. Then you can be definitely and indefinitely. Ooh, that's a good one. So there's more you can build, but in the moment, if every student is expected to stop and think through just a few things, they'll start to become independent spellers. And then they focus in, what's your tricky bit? Oh, yeah, it's that. I always want to write definite. Okay. What's your tricky? How are you going to remember? Finite's in there. So I haven't told you, what I want is everybody speaking the same language. And I have to be really honest, I have met over the years a lot of teachers who are very nervous about their own spelling. And we can't alienate them by expecting them to do degree level linguistics. And that's slightly what's happening in the world out there right now. People are getting very linguisticy about it all. And I have a degree in English language and linguistics. So, I know that stuff. I've got all the books. It terrifies people. So we need to make it, when it comes to a school, we need to make it accessible to students and the teachers.
Well, I could see how a math teacher might say, I didn't sign up for this. Leave me alone. Like I do math. This is my thing. This is not my responsibility. That reading thing is in elementary school.
Yeah.
not my class.
Yeah. Can I just give a little anecdote there? It's kind of equivalent of a community college, but you can go when you're 16 and you can take what they call foundation courses, which can be, these are young people at 16 who generally they're leaving school with nothing. So you can kind of figure out what an equivalent would be. And the math tutor was teaching them, she teaches 2D shapes, square, triangle, rectangle, parallelogram, circle. She decided to take this approach that I was just talking about, where you say the word and you take it apart and we build it with puzzle pieces. We use grapheme puzzles so that you can't make a mistake with these students. And she pre-tested and post-tested. And at the end of it, not only could they spell all these shapes, okay, these were kids with real learning needs, special ed class, they could identify the shapes much quicker than they could before. They could name them and name them accurately as well as spell them. And they could spell parallelogram. Okay. And that was a math tutor saying, okay, I know the English. Well, actually, she had a background in English too. And that's probably what motivated her and gave her the courage to do it. But as soon as you see the difference that improved literacy makes to math results, and let's face it, we're all results driven in school, that's what starts to motivate teachers to take it on. You see the difference.
So, Judy, I think in listening to this, there's a lot to say in terms of having a certain core group of strategies, whether it's spelling, whether it's in having maybe certain roots and prefixes and suffixes. Maybe it's certain comprehension strategies. Maybe it's an acronym for getting started with writing, the writing process. There are all these types of core strategies. In terms of training people, both you and I have coached. You're coaching in a school now. I'm a consultant going into multiple schools. So my mind is thinking in terms of, how do you make this school-wide, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school? How do you make this a school-wide understanding that we all speak the same language?
So I think it's easier said than done. I think very often there's a group of people at certain schools or in general that are extremely like, we're going to do this this year. And, it doesn't just happen that easily. I think that it's important to really pick maybe just a couple of things rather than a million things that you're going to tackle, and maybe laser focus in on a couple of things that as a school you systematically want to implement. Because I think if you have too many things, the intentions might be great, but then you're not going to get very far. Like, for instance, this year, I know I'm going to go back in and I'm seeing my principal, God willing, soon. And we're going to I want to laser in on progress monitoring and systems and structures for that. So that might be one of my things. And then another thing might be maybe, I just took the training for SRSD, and we learned about taking prompts apart, the do what. And that might be something that I bring in. I think it's just really hard, though, to bring in something if not everybody's had the training, if there's not enough professional development. And I think that buy-in is very important. People have to understand, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How is it going to help kids? And then another thing that Faith's been really coaching me a lot in is thinking about, is this the most important thing that we could focus on right now to shift the needle for kids? So I think it's thinking about all of those things. And then I think it also, I have to be honest, it has to come from the top. Like, sometimes teachers might want it, a coach might want it, but it's really important that the leadership wants it too. Because what happens is sometimes you'll tell teachers something and you'll be like, okay, this is really important. Oh, but the boss didn't say it's important. You're saying this is important. It has to be a clear message, I think, across the board in order for it to happen. And I'm going to ask you, Tricia, do you have any recommendations? And are we on the same page, or can you give me some of your professional input?
I weep over the same things you weep over, I'll just tell you, because we do see that, and we do see that enthusiasm. And it's the balance between having it, if it's top down and people are resisting, that doesn't always work. And yet if it's like just grassroots enthusiasm, that peters out without proper support from senior leadership, what we would call a senior leadership in a school. So I do see that. I've sounds awful. I haven't stopped training completely, but what I've asked people to do with that spelling thing that I think has the book is to do professional development sessions as a book club. Because what I was doing, and obviously after COVID, everything was online, and there we go. Everything was online, and it's just got really hard to connect with teachers. They're busy. You want to not put your camera on. Anyway, and so training would just tick a box. I'd spend my 2 hours and they'd get all this stuff and it would tick a box. But I don't want to tick boxes. I want to change trajectories in education. Yeah. And
Tricia, a big cheers is coming. You know the drill. You said we have to.
Thank you.
sorry to interrupt you, Tricia, but
No,
when you talk about ticking boxes, just to say, we did that, we're doing that, that's not really going to get us anywhere. Sorry.
no, that's great. Thank you. That affirmation's important to me. And so what I'm asking people to do is to run it like a book club. And I'm happy to come in and facilitate. But because teaching spelling, and when I say teaching spelling, I mean broadening vocabularies, finding some joy in words, for one thing, huge satisfaction when somebody does something they never thought they could do. This isn't just the drudgery of passing a spelling test. As I say, get rid of the spelling test. We need another reason for doing this. And then, to do it over 4 sessions, to meet together, to read the first section and go, well, who do we have? Well, what do we have? What are we talking about here? That's my goal for my next book, is just a study guide to do that. The thing about, of course, phonics is it's hard to do phonics from a book. So have to do that, consider that. But don't know where. Yes, trying to get people enthused by doing rather than hearing about. That's my goal, and I haven't quite succeeded at it yet. They're great with that reading thing. They do the training, and they jump in and they work with students, and they get back in touch and saying, oh my gosh, that worked. But for some reason, spelling is a harder sell. So reading that's brilliant. That's easy.
Yeah. So it could be harder, just like writing is a harder sell, right? So I think anything that's expressive, written expression, spelling, formulating paragraphs, anything like that is harder than recognizing a word or reading a paragraph or an essay. So it's just harder.
It is harder. And for that reason, again, rather than saying, okay, here's our spelling, here are our vocabulary words we're going to do with 7th grade this year. Rather than doing that, take a big deep breath and have the words come out of what you're doing in various classes. What are you reading with them? What are the words they need for that? And how do we get creative with those words? Make words something they come to love, and that just isn't a drudge. And we want to make it enlightening and not fun. Can I say fun? I'm kind of a killer of fun. I don't mean to be, but because I want them to experience satisfaction, which is actually, in the end, keeps them coming back for more. Fun, yeah, we can have all sorts of fun, but really, really cracking some of the difficult stuff. And I think that will happen in math and science. Those are the words. Your history, your social studies, teaching about hierarchies and oligarchies. There's things to do around word study and spelling, and it's getting everybody enthused when, as the article says, really, they just want to teach science.
Can I ask Tricia a question, Faith? What do you think of, have you used ChatGPT, Copilot, and so forth? So like if there's a passage, what do you think about taking that same topic and maybe having it at different grade levels to provide deeper access? Any opinions?
As a creator of content, I won't let AI near my computer. I know that sounds awful. I'm not a Luddite in any way. I adore technology, but as a creator, I want to write those things myself, and I want to do that. And I want teachers thinking how to do that and thinking of individual needs. What are you in a small group? Are you in a big class? What are you doing? Obviously, it's harder in a big classroom. So I haven't used it, but I do follow conversations on social media where, teachers are having varying degrees of success. I think some have found it really frustrating to do that. So the answer is, I don't know.
Just thinking about it in terms of access, I mean, I'm taking that professional training and it talks about like, if there's a complex passage, you could partner kids up with somebody who's possibly a stronger reader. But, I know that can promote different types of feelings too. So I'm very sensitive to the child. And, I always want to keep the child at the forefront. What can I provide to a student to provide access, but also be very respectful of, the truth is not everybody is at grade level. That's just the reality. And yes, we want to provide kids access at grade level, but we also want kids being able to, not only understand, but to be able to lift those words off the page. So it's just, I can imagine that it's, it's a struggle for us in early childhood, in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. I could only imagine that those same struggles, which maybe are even more problematic because they've persisted for so long for so many of those kids, how do we navigate through that? Because like, doing that word work with words, yes, that's going to help. And it's going to definitely help provide a deeper love of the language. But I'm sure that there's going to still be some kids that are frustrated, like, I can't read this kind of feeling.
Yeah, you're right. I got a bit woolly there with the love of the language thing. I just trying to make it light. No, I just want to make it lighter for the teachers, or lighter in general.
No, I think that love of language is definitely something that is so important. But my point was that there's just some kids that probably are so beat up by the system that they've gotten so far in their educational journey, or maybe they just came to America or to a different country and they're just learning English. Yeah. I guess that there's so many different scenarios, and how as teachers can we be more prepared to deal with that? Because I know teachers are really frustrated. There's so many demands, and then on top of everything else, whether it be in early childhood or in middle school or in upper grades, there's always like, okay, did you think about your English language learners? Did you think about your special education students? Did you think about, and at some point it's like, as a teacher, you're like, oh my God, how much more can I possibly do without having like a heart attack or feeling? And I think that it also promotes feelings for teachers sometimes, like this inadequacy, like we want to do well. We're always trying, but it's like never enough. We're always given feedback. Oh, you should have done this. You should have done that. Did you think about this kid? Did you make a different worksheet? Like,
and I'm going to jump on what Judy said based on the statistics in this article, Tricia. So in the article, it says, the nation's report card, 70% of 8th graders scored below proficient, which means if you have a typical classroom, 17 out of 25 kids are not functioning where they should. So, at some point you have to just say, how do you really still function with grade level work when so many kids in some schools, this doesn't happen in every school, but there are some schools where it's definitely the majority of kids in the class are not meeting grade level.
Yeah. And that, if that's too overwhelming for one-to-one, there's a couple of things. School leadership needs to be prepared for school to look different if they're going to crack this. You can't just keep doing the same old thing, because in high school, you're not teaching reading anyway. You can't say, well, there's new reading strategies. Well, who cares? We're in high school now. And if they can't access the text, something needs to change. So it might be a radical change and a real imagination of how do we get 20 minutes of one-to-one for each one of those kids a week. That's the least I've ever done. I worked with some boys up in the Arctic over Zoom during COVID. I had 17 and a half minutes per child per week.
Are you talking about one-on-one?
One-on-one.
Okay. So this came up when we had a conversation with the Murphys. So we will have the Murphys on in October as well. and they are focused, of course, on adolescent literacy. And they also said that schools have to be prepared for some children to get one-on-one work. There's no avoiding that.
I give both of you cheers. That is so important.
Yeah.
And it, yeah, and it takes work. You can't say, and that's what, feedback is, when you put the time and effort into structuring that reading thing for those who need it, my line is, it's not expensive, it's priceless, right? It changes everything. And it doesn't have to be an hour a day. I mean, literally 20 minutes a week is better than nothing, one-to-one, or it's better than an hour with a group of 5. That's the other thing. You can move very quickly. And then, so they need to catch up very quickly. And that it's not optional if you've got that. If the bulk of students are reading that far below grade level, then actually what you're doing probably is using much simpler text. But what we find the process with that reading thing is, if they've been in school since they were little, and not thriving, they may have gaps of attendance. They may not have any actual learning need. It's just life has got in the way of education. We can catch them up very, very, very quickly. If a student has, varying degrees of educational need, they might take a little bit longer. So what the gaps should be, if we do this right, what the gaps should be when they go to science class should be those large vocabulary words that the teachers are responsible for teaching and taking apart and exploring. And so then the comprehension improves, because that's I always ask teachers when they say, oh, he can read but he doesn't understand. My question is always, have you heard him read out loud? And the answer is no, always, because it's high school. And so the question is he reading every single word and not understanding because of the syntax, just simply complex sentences and things? That's a possibility. Or is he actually skipping every long word because, to quote the young person, I don't read long ones. Right?
Exactly. And so kind of separating out need and seeing exactly what is holding this child back. And, you can't just expect to get somewhere with comprehension strategies if they can't read the words on the page. And you won't know that unless they read out loud.
Correct. And so my little test is always, to a teacher, if you said to your student, please take these instructions down to reception, and they said, all right, then, do it. Would you get a different response if you left a note that said, please take these instructions to reception? And they skip the words instructions and reception and don't know what to do. That's a decoding problem, not a comprehension problem.
I love it. I love it. And Judy, I think we have to quote Tricia on this one. It's not expensive, it's priceless.
I knew you wrote it down. While you were writing it down, tears were filling up in my eyes.
Yeah, that was excellent. That's a quote I won't forget.
That's a great one. That one should be posted in every building. Every building, just in case when budgets are coming out, when decision making is happening, when you're thinking about what your MTSS or RTI systems and structures look like. That's a really good one to look at, because unfortunately, that's where a lot of budget cuts come. Intervention, helping kids one-on-one, small group instruction. And sometimes we put the least qualified people in those positions with the least training too. So there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of kids out there that need us. And there's kids that need us in early childhood, but there's also kids that need us in the older grades. And I've come across those kids and I don't know how those kids are doing right now. For some of them I was able to help, but some of them I didn't see them every day or so forth. And I hope that they're doing okay. And the training that I was just doing with Literacy IO, it reminds you that a lot of kids that don't crack the code, they don't end up having a very bright future. So it's very serious. And it's not, sometimes people don't realize how serious it is because I cracked the code. It wasn't hard for me to crack it. It wasn't hard for my kids. But for the families that have kids that struggle, it's very, very hard. I work with those families. Faith works with those families, and I'm sure you do, Tricia. And we can't ignore these systematic issues because they're not just their issues, they're our issues.
Tricia, yeah, as I'm listening to Judy talk about this, I can't help but think, however, getting back to those numbers, how many kids could be sitting there needing intervention, yet we can't put all these kids in intervention. And to defend the schools and the decisions they have to make, once they get to middle school and high school, I think we do have to look at the reality of the situation, the budget. And yes, maybe we could advocate for more kids getting one-on-one, but if you have large numbers in a school, you can't possibly provide intervention for all of those students, which is why I think having these core strategies that are embedded in the content areas, not just in English class, but across the board, are necessary. Your thoughts, Tricia?
Absolutely. And I in that same college with the foundation students, one of the students had left. He's a ADHD, dyslexic, at 16 could really read nothing. And he was angry, basically, as he would storm out whenever they asked him to do something. And in this is the college where they have the English department and the math department teachers using the same approaches to language. And they just called it general phonics. They didn't call it anything brand name, just called it phonics. But what they did was more. And he learned to read. Just doing that. Not everybody will, but I got to see what I would have thought was impossible. I love it when teachers do things that I think are impossible and get these amazing results. I set up an ideal and say, try to do it. But if you can't do it, still do the next best thing. And his feedback was, I found it there. I meant to print it out so I could read it for you. His feedback was, if you do phonics in only English, you'll forget about it. But if it keeps popping up, if it's also happening in your other classes, it becomes your go-to. I'm paraphrasing him. It becomes your go-to strategy. So the more you hear the same language, the more it becomes your main strategy. It's not something it's a crossover then. And in the end, during lockdown, he ended up helping his siblings because his mum's dyslexic too. And so he could help his siblings with homework. And he was, I love this, reading subtitles on games, right? So he went from being an angry young man who didn't read anything, and just by really getting into those words, could then self-teach. We talk about that with speech to print phonics and how obviously we're not teaching them every word. We're teaching them the concepts, and these concepts then start ticking over as self-teaching. So it's not, maybe it's that, and that's why you can accomplish so much in 20 minutes one-to-one, because you're getting the ball rolling. Not with everybody. Some people, that ball takes a long time to start rolling, but others will just take off. So yes, I think we do what we can do. If a lot of support comes in classrooms, great things can happen. I've had teachers say, love to do one-to-one, but I've got 11 kids in 1 hour. So guess what? We're doing this. One woman, instead of using the TRT boards, just that she let them use dry erase pens on their desks. They just, would do all their activities and stuff like that. So yeah, but do something, not nothing.
Tricia, what about assessment for older kids that are struggling? What are some assessment tools or things that you've done? I know you mentioned earlier in the episode that it's important to listen to kids read, and I think that is so important, especially with our older kids. Very often they're reading silently. It's such a wonderful thing to actually listen and have that discussion. Any recommendations in the category of assessment?
I have a colleague who's made the most amazing assessment, and it's not yet available to everybody. But what it is really is word decoding, tiny spelling, also in the sort of the same order that you would get in your average speech to print program, and then a tiny passage with really unusual words in it. And it's really, really quick. And she's tested it across all the prisons in England. Have used it, and they're a hard crowd, okay, in education, and it was really, really good. So they could identify really quickly the people who needed intensive one-to-one support. They generally get that reading thing, or in the class with a tutor who can, with a group of people to work on spell. It's not necessarily my stuff, but in general, using phonics towards spelling. So yeah, it doesn't have to be long. When teachers ask me what reading test to use, for that reading thing, I say use whatever test you always use, because we don't want them to be good at that reading thing. We want them to improve in reading. So if you've got good assessments, they are good assessments for measuring progress. But if you're trying to set them, then we have a really simple word decoding test. We don't, and I say it with high school students, and this might be surprising to some people who use other programs, we don't ever ask them to identify a grapheme out of the context of a whole meaningful word. Because
could you explain that? Because
yeah, so
probably people don't understand. Some people will not understand that language.
There's been a really big push here in the UK to do phonics assessments, and lots of schools have gone down the path of, showing someone a PH and saying basically, what's that sound? Or showing someone an F, what's that sound, etc. And we don't do that because, frankly, I could mess with all our minds trying to do that. The code is complex, and it really is when we see them in the context of whole meaningful words that we can go, oh yeah, there's a way to spell right there. And so we only assess from that level. And then other tests assess comprehension and spelling. And I tell the assessment that comes with that reading thing will only tell you how quickly they're going to move through. They don't assign a reading age or anything. We use the old Bert word reading assessment.
So, I would imagine for older students to do something like, well, what sound, at that point, there are so many different ways to spell one sound that it wouldn't make sense to really just isolate it like there's one-to-one correspondence. So that's okay to do with babies, when they're just learning the code and you just want to know if they have one-to-one correspondence. But when they're older, I don't think that would be effective.
No, and I'm a little bit overprotective of teenagers, I think, too, in that you don't want to put them off from the first moment. We've got to hook them in to want to do this. And so trying not to remind them of when they felt they failed when they were little is a big part of how we approach a session.
That's really interesting. Judy, I'm listening to Tricia. That emotional component, just from a mental health point of view, how kids want to protect themselves and exposing them, embarrassing them, even if there's nobody around, they feel it. Any thoughts about what we've discussed, Judy? Any other questions that you would like to ask Tricia?
No, I just would like to make a comment. I mean, we had an episode, which I'm really proud of dyslexic fathers that struggled with literacy themselves. And because of that struggle, they're trying to take preventative measures and be advocates for their own children. And, that episode really made me think about, that there are older people that struggle. Some of the fathers on there didn't crack the code until later on in life. So, and these were people that, they have successful jobs. They figured it out, but it must have not been easy to figure it out. And I just, hope more people become brave and less embarrassed if they struggle. And also as a system, I think we have to be more compassionate because, other things in life you can hide. But I think even that episode taught me an awareness. It's very hard to hide that you can't read and write. You can't really hide it that well. Reading and writing presents itself at every moment of our lives. You're asked to do things all the time. So I think that, we do need to get this right. And I'm wondering, are you guys ahead of us in terms of your literacy journey as compared to the States? It seems like, Faith, the two guests that we've had for our middle school and high school students are from the UK, right? Both from the UK. Is there a reason, or is that just a coincidence? I'm just wondering.
Our national inspectorate called Ofsted will ask, when they come to inspect a high school now, they will ask, how are you using phonics? So it's that panic made me very busy in the past couple of years. And then the prison inspectorate asks the same question now. So
Wait, so you have a prison, somebody from the prisons actually comes, visits your schools?
No. I mean, the inspector goes in to inspect the education department in prisons. We only have a handful of private prisons. Our prison system is very different from yours. Mostly they're all government run. And we have 4 different providers. Everything's outsourced to colleges and things to provide. So it's 4 different providers, but one inspectorate. And so we've gone from, I think we're up to over 300 tutors in 100 prisons now in England.
I wonder where we're
reading
at. Faith, do you know where we're at in this country with that whole, very often at PDs, they'll quote, the prison pipeline and how literacy affects it, but I don't really know much about. I know there's more communication between researchers and teachers. I think that the literacy view has been pivotal in having those discussions, but is there a lot of discussion, Faith, do you know, in our country between what's going on in those prisons and education? And are the prisons incorporating the science of reading? I wonder.
I do think there has been discussions just like this. And in some cases, the prisons have been more successful in terms of getting kids to read than in some, local school districts. So I can't say that for sure, but I have read that there are, the prison population in some cases that whatever they're doing, and I'm sure they are using something that's structured, systematic.
We're gonna need to do an episode on that one. I'm definitely very interested.
All right, well, we'll look into it. Tricia, to wrap up, I have just one last question, and then if there's anything we didn't cover, please just add in to anything you want to say. College ready. Now we're talking about prison population. in this country, we're obsessed with the idea of being college ready. Is there anything that could be done in middle school and high school to get kids college ready if they haven't been ready entering into those schools? In other words, is it possible to close the gap and actually get kids college ready when there have been so many years that have gone by where they were not really reading? What are your thoughts?
The younger, the better. And that goes with, if you can't do one-to-one in secondary school, don't let them get to secondary school with this need. Conquer it in a group where they're less self-conscious, when is middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade?
So it depends on where it is, but it's generally 6th to 8th. But for instance, my local school is 5th to 8th. So it really depends on where it is.
Yeah, get them at that. 11 is the absolute youngest that we say for that reading thing. And I used to say never, ever, ever in a primary school, but we go to year 6 it's only 2 schools. There's no middle school. And we then saw, as my dear friend broke all my rules and laughed at me. That's fine. She was very good. Very forgiving person. She used it in the primary school, and it had such an impact on what happened for that child to move into high school. Why don't we crack it there? And also, because I'm a real advocate for volunteers by and large are not that happy to work with teenagers. Take some special, you need the youth workers, right, to go in and do that. They can do a brilliant job. But lots of volunteers will go and work with younger kids. So if we can train them up to deliver that one-to-one, commit for, what we used to do is just ask a commitment for 6 weeks and then think about it again, because, it's a lot of retired people who want to go on holidays and stuff. But there's, we've just got to make use of our communities. It's a national disaster. It's not actually something that can wait till every single teacher has the right training, or till we change teacher training in colleges and they all come out ready to tackle literacy. We just don't have time. So I think whatever you can do, college ready, yeah, get them young. Ask them what they want to do if they're older. Do they want to be college ready? Because that's actually half the battle. When you're 16, do you see college as where you want to go? If not, I talk about teaching vocabulary for the next stage. Don't teach it like for where they are now. And if you go and do health and social care, which is to be a carer, it's at your community college kind of course, there's some really complex vocabulary. There's complex vocabulary in phys ed. I want to play ice hockey. Sorry, that's the only proof that I've lived in England for too long. I want to play hockey. Hockey here is grass hockey, so it's very confusing. If they want to do that, then let's do physiology words, right? If we want to get them college ready, let's make sure they want to go to college, and that they feel there's a hope that they can go to college because they're tackling this stuff now. So motivate them in terms of where they want to be. And if they want to become doctors and they want to become attorneys, that's possible, but they have to start at a certain point, being able to work with the professionals and want to work with the professionals. But, I think they've been burned so often and disappointed by people who they trusted. That lack of trust is really hard to get past. And, I think that's a big issue. I know I've worked with older students, and their first reaction is, well, what makes
this any different from what I've had before. I was burned before. So what are you going to do for me, lady? You know, maybe not saying it like that, but that's the thought.
Yeah, and that's the promise then. That's our promise, the deal. You know what? That's gone. All that's gone. We start today. You don't have to know anything that we haven't learned together. We start all over, and I will not let you fail. And that you have to be good on that promise. And how you keep that promise is by following in that reading thing, doing it as written. And I'm not saying that because I don't trust teachers. I'm saying that because that's the safety net. That incremental structure of a structured linguistic phonics or speech to print phonics program is what keeps them safe. And spelling is something different. We can go on and go off on tangents and pick and choose words and have some fun. But actually, when you're that vulnerable and you say, let's start here, let's get you 10 steps ahead from where you are now. And then if you like it there, let's take 10 more steps. I don't think I would, take an 11-year-old and say, do you want to go to college? I'd say, do you want to read a book with me? You read it. You read a sentence, I'll read. That's our deal. You read a sentence, I'll read a sentence. You read a paragraph, I'll read a paragraph. And they get through whole novels like that, tutors do. So.
Yeah. So, Judy, I like to wrap up because to me, Tricia really offered so much here. From what I could see, I'm walking away feeling like if we're going to make these changes in middle school, high school, yes, we have to still pull out one-on-one, but for those large groups of kids, we still could be doing an awful lot for them at that age if we had certain core strategies, core principles that could go across the content areas. So we thank you, Tricia. Judy,
thank you
like
so much. Yes. Thank you. And I think everything you said was brilliant, including get it throughout your curriculum. If we're doing science, we could also write about, different things and use, like Faith said, incorporate those strategies. And just one last thing about the college. Not every kid is going to go to college, but even if you become an electrician, a plumber, air condition repair, there's still vocabulary that you need to learn. And there's still definitely literacy is important no matter where your journey lands. And and that's okay too. So wherever your path lands, make sure that you learn how to read and write because it's important. Thank you, Tricia. You have been a spectacular guest. Please follow us on Facebook, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Join our group. Follow us on Instagram, The Literacy View. Also now, new in addition, you can advertise with The Literacy View. If you want to advertise with The Literacy View, that info will be in our show notes. You could also visit us at theliteracyview.com. And also, we have started getting donations for our podcast. It costs money to produce this thing. So we are really honored that, people are showing us their love and support. So thank you, because we're hoping to change lives one view at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And again, Tricia's book that I have right here, that spelling thing. And you can find all of Tricia's work on thatreadingthing.com. Thank you.
Thank you.